Hi, Bruce.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good. Are we the only two?
Hello.
There's Dan.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good. Is it generic person, Andrew?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
I wish I knew how to use this thing.
Hangouts? That's a pain in the ass.
Okay. What time is it everywhere where you guys are?
Mountain Standard here, 7:30.
It's just Pacific here.
Yeah, I'm actually in Portland. So.
I'm up in Bellingham. Do you know where Bellingham is?
Yeah. Oh, welcome.
Amir was on just like briefly. He seemed to have some sound problems, so he dived back out again. I think he was gonna try and fix it.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hey,
Hi.
Andy. Hopefully, Amir. Oh, there he is.
There we go. When in doubt, restart. There we go. So I'm supposed to hit a button. Wait, are we live already?
We are live.
Okay, I just shared the Google Hangout link. If I hit, I'll hit start. Okay, he's going to hit start broadcast. Okay. What's up?
How's it going?
Chilling.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So is Andrew, are you here?
I think he may be starting it, and that's all, Amir.
Oh, okay, got it. Got it.
Yeah, he said he wanted to let us know he'll be popping in and out and muted for most of the meetup.
Okay, cool. Cool. Laura, did you get your Apple TV stuff working out?
No, not yet.
Okay. So, what do y'all think of the keynote and all that good stuff? What do y'all think?
I think I want a new watch.
Really?
To me, the watch was the biggest thing, man.
Yeah, it was interesting with the LTE support and not having to go outside and have to actually carry your phone. I'm afraid that it's like a new pair of sneakers. I'm gonna go running, so I need a new pair of sneakers, and then it's gonna be like I'm gonna go running. I need a new watch because that will make sure I go running.
The thing I picked up on, I was listening to Core Intuition today, and they commented, you realize that the one with the LTE is going to cost you $120 a year.
Yeah, it's $10 more on your AT&T account or whatever account you have.
Yeah, exactly. It's an extra $10. And they said, well, do I really need to spend that $120 a year for? Now I'm on a Series 0 watch. I want a Series 3. But thinking about that, and I often my iPhone's sitting on the desk, right? It's in a cradle on the desk. It stays here all the time. And so I leave the house all the time. I go, oh, damn, forgot my phone, right? And so I would use it. But do I need $120 extra a year out of it?
I think from the running standpoint, especially if you just wear some, running slacks or shorts, there's no real good place to put your phone or your watch or whatever. So from that perspective, I totally get it. And especially if you can accept Apple Pay from the watch and not have to have a phone or any wallet or anything, that's pretty freaking cool. I can see how runners would really appreciate that.
But yeah, you have to think about it, and you think, well, it's only $100 more for the watch or whatnot, but then there's the incremental costs on top of which my carrier here in Canada doesn't actually support it yet.
Got it. Yeah.
But they will. Or what are you on?
Rogers, yeah.
Yeah.
So they got TELUS and they got Bell, but not Rogers.
They're going to start on Bell and then get TELUS.
Yeah.
I'm on TELUS, so once they get the TELUS one out, I think I'm going for it.
Why are y'all talking about fake companies?
You're going, who is this? Hey, you got to remember, Bell.
What about Fido?
Inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham. He was Canadian.
Canadians. I gotta make fun of y'all. I'm from Dallas. I'm a Cowboy, so.
Did you get hit at all by Harvey? Were you?
No, so I'm in Dallas. So just for perspective, you could fit the state of New York in between me and Houston.
Yeah,
so that's pretty much how far away.
Well, I know it was far, and I was surprised when I've only ever been to San Antonio myself.
Yeah.
And San Antonio, I thought was a reasonable distance from Houston, but they were there were reports of flooding because of all the rain and stuff like that. And I'm going, oh, okay, so that's that's why I ask. I'm not.
Yeah. We had the weather was much cooler. We definitely saw a drop in temperature and stuff, and we got a little bit of drizzle, but that was really it. We had a gas shortage in Dallas, and we got the gas shortage in Dallas because the news said there was a gas shortage. So then, of course, everyone at the exact same time decided that I need to fill up, and so that caused the gas shortage. And
yep.
So that was fantastic. And we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. So and that happened over Memorial Day weekend. So basically, I was like, all right, this is all the gas I get until maybe Wednesday, and there you have it. So that was probably the biggest impact that we had in Dallas up here. Anyone getting an iPhone X? I'm totally getting an iPhone X.
Maybe. I'm still on an SE, so.
It will be interesting to see if this price point causes a problem.
Yeah, no, that's true. I'm really wondering when Sierra and iOS are going to converge, because I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. Especially with, so I don't know if y'all noticed, but they didn't mention High Sierra at all during the keynote. And right now, High Sierra is still beta. So last I checked, the GMs haven't dropped for High Sierra.
Someone said it was releasing next week.
Yeah, 23rd.
25th.
25th.
25th is, yeah.
So 25th is the official date for High Sierra.
Yeah.
But usually I would expect some GM drop to happen on the internal developer stuff. One interesting thing with High Sierra that's going to affect, quote unquote, affect all of us is that the default installation of Ruby is 2.3. So right now, the default installation of Ruby has been 2.0 forever. So the fact that they've bumped everything to 2.3 is interesting. There'll be aside from RubyMotion, I imagine there'll be downstream implications to everyone having to push up their system version to 2.3. With regards to RubyMotion, if you're building against 2.0, now is the time to upgrade to 2.3. Or don't upgrade your OS, right? So that's something to take into consideration at that point in time.
Gee, what version am I using? Yeah, I am using 2.0, but I'm not using the one that came with the OS.
Oh no! Yeah, so you want to upgrade to 2.3.3 at a minimum.
I'm 2.34, I think.
Yeah, and that's fine.
2.4.
Anything after 2.3.3, I think. But if you don't upgrade to High Sierra until you do, right? Or have like a OS available that has the older version. So the tricky part, just I guess, unless y'all want to talk about anything else, I can go into RubyMotion internals and talk about like what the beta process was like, during all the beta upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. So is there anything like else that y'all want to talk about with regards to RubyMotion before I jump into the internals of RubyMotion? Any questions? Questions, concerns, comments? Ask me anything, like seriously. Nothing?
Do you think RubyMotion will upgrade to a higher level? It's at 1.9 something, right? 1.93.
Yeah, so chances are it's going to probably hit parity with 2.3.3 also.
Okay.
So RM 4.22 is obviously not going to change. So you can always do sudo motion update -- cache version 4.22. And if you're on, and that's bound to Xcode 8.3.3. So if you have Xcode 8.3.3, RubyMotion 4.22 on LCAP, you're good, right? Eventually, Apple will stop accepting apps built with a specific iOS version. So usually, let's see, they dropped 7.0. 7.0 came out in 2010, right? They dropped 7.0 support in 2015. So you've got 5 years to get off of LCAP. So that's kind of where that's at. But yeah, you'll want to do a cache version. RubyMotion 5.0 will not have 32-bit support anymore, simply because Xcode 9 has dropped all ARM v7, ARM 7X, all 32-bit support. So you're no longer allowed to deploy apps to the App Store that are below iOS 8. And that's just a hard cap that Apple has put on.
Apple is purging 32-bit apps from the App Store, aren't they, Amir?
Yes, they have been purged.
Okay, yeah, they're all gone from the
They are all
from
gone.
the iOS App Store.
Yes.
I can't recall. Are they doing the same from the Mac App Store?
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure on the Mac App Store. So for
Yeah,
Mac,
they don't announce things for that, but it's likely because it's supposed to be 64. Like they won't take 32-bit apps for the Mac App Store either, will they?
yeah, I don't imagine they would. I did before dropping 32-bit support on Mac OS. I made sure to consult some of the guys that are actively using RubyMotion for Mac, and they said, yeah, it's fine. So basically, anything before 10.9 is not going to be supported. So even 10.9 is supported right now. Moving forward, it just depends on what happens. But right now, 10.9, 11, 12, and 13 will continue to be supported. Cool. Any other questions?
As you know, Amir, I've been playing with the yoga stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's been frustrating.
Yes.
But I have been able to, through looking at other things like Motion Game and trying to figure out what they did there, and I was able actually to get the memory management working under Objective-C.
Yep.
To some degree.
Right. So the interesting thing is that this is the first time. This is one of the reasons why like the C APIs weren't officially supported, but I'm pushing towards getting that support now, and that's one of the big things that I want to get working next year, is to expose all the header files, codified those in some way, and then figure out these weird nuances between iOS and Android.
Right. I couldn't get the Android one to work, but
yeah, Android is pretty rough, and it's all around this idea of going down and looking at foreign function interfaces, taking a similar stride that mRuby has taken, right? So it'll be interesting to see how RubyMotion and mRuby converge, and I'm working towards seeing that kind of convergence, right? Like I want to see that kind of convergence. And it's exciting from that perspective, right? If we can have that kind of parity. So anyways, yeah, that is one of the things that I'd like to do this year.
Yeah, I was surprised that no one had seen in Flow how much memory leaking there was going on. I mean,
yeah, it was in progress, and with regards to the timing of Flow, the acquisition and all that stuff, it was one of those things where it's like, I couldn't say anything, and development kind of stopped, and it was like, okay, we got to wait for the transition. When the transition occurred, I was like, awesome, but then iOS 11 came out, and I was like, oh my God. And it was dealing with all the iOS 11 updates, and then we're finally to a point where it's like, okay, everything's settled down. Now we can think about where the interesting thing about just like Ruby as a whole, I think with regards to mRuby, CRuby, Rubinius, and some of the endeavors that have happened specifically from Ruby Kaiki 2016, is that we're trying to go down the stack as opposed to build up. So better interoperability with C, better portability across different architectures. All those things are like becoming important, and that's one of the things that I generally gathered from Ruby Kaigi 2016, and I want RubyMotion to go in a similar direction. And we'll basically Flow was an approach. As far as yoga feels really good as far as trying to get that layout system working. Cocos 2DX, kind of seeing how much of the foreign function interfaces we need to expose to leverage Cocos 2DX. Same deal with Ruby 2D. Basically opening up as much as we can to make FFI with C pleasant. And that's basically, it's part of it. And so as far as Flow is concerned, Flow UI is definitely something that I want to see grow. As far as the other parts of Flow, which is abstractions around HTTP or isolated storage, there's already really great solutions out there. It's just a matter of maybe leveraging those as opposed to re-implementing them. And that's kind of how I feel about the other parts of Flow. But with regards to Flow UI, there has to be some kind of convergence, because Android's widgets versus iOS layouts, they're never going to converge. So there has to be a solution.
The other thing I'm new to this whole thing in RubyMotion, and actually Ruby itself, I'm still getting my hands around, but I'm trying to find out where you guys are going because the competition's stiff out there. I mean, we've got React Native, we've got Xamarin, we've got Rem Objects, which is actually pretty good, private company, but we've got all kinds of things going on out there. And where do you see RubyMotion? Where do they fit?
Right.
Who's your customers, in other words? I mean,
yeah, and that's a great question. So, and that's something that before I did the acquisition, I really thought about. And what happens, what it really comes down to is actually two things. So one thing we're finally realizing as an industry that we rely heavily on portable C, and basically everything just with regards to devices and ARM architectures and stuff. If you want your quote unquote language to survive, you have to be able to interrupt with C. So that was one big thing. We're kind of moving into an age of bring your own language, and I know that. And so when I thought about RubyMotion and where it goes from here, it was really thinking about, okay, what is the differentiator for RubyMotion in a world where it's bring your own language? And from that perspective, it's I would say it's the business acumen that I bring to the table. And what I'm trying to say there is that your view engine, the language you choose, like your dialect as far as what APIs you use or what libraries you use, is not going to help you make a successful app. What makes a successful app is what makes a good mobile app is more subjective. And from my perspective, I know what it takes to make a good mobile app, one that has very high engagement and one that monetizes well. So there's two primary stories with regards to mobile apps. You're either building a mobile app to monetize, or you're building a mobile app for reach and engagement. Let's say you have like a website, and then you want to think about like, okay, how do I engage a larger audience on mobile? So those are your two modus operandums. And the challenge there is that it's really evolving, ever-evolving industry, and the answer isn't a framework. The answer isn't, a framework is not going to help you hit a industry conversion rate of 3% for your ratings, or hit a industry conversion rate of 2.8% on your in-app purchases. Those are kind of like subjective techniques that I've internalized, that I've worked with other companies, just collaborating with them. And my goal for RubyMotion is to basically codify some of those techniques within the framework itself. So you don't have to think about how do I do push notification in such a way where they accept it, or when is the best time to ask for a review for an app, or when is the best time to ask for monetization. Those things are basically baked into the framework itself. So that's one thing that I guess competitively I want to bring to the table. The other side of it is the story of I don't want people building mobile apps until they need to build mobile apps, entirely native mobile apps. So the idea there is that if you have a responsive website, my general recommendation is to deploy that, like get that working, have the facilities baked in to gauge and measure engagement, to see, what variants of people actually use the mobile app, and then and start preparing for a more native experience. And a lot of those things are things that I want to bake into RubyMotion. How do you create a wrapped app, and how do you evolve to a full native experience in such a way where you're not always committing 100% into like any one of these initiatives? And this is how you build successful apps. And these other companies, they don't, for some reason, they're really emphasizing the tech, like like React Native. Oh, we've got our virtual DOM, you've got Xamarin that is pushing Xamarin Forms and all this random stuff, and it's like, I just want to build. I'm a company that wants to build an app to reach a lot of people, or I'm a developer that wants to monetize an idea, and how can I successfully do that? This part of it is something that I excel at, I would say, and at a minimum, it's like I've been there. Right? I have a #3 Android app. I had a #1 iOS app. I had a #1 free iOS app. And I've collaborated with the guys in Monument Valley, Blackbox. The guys at Blackbox, basically, they won the Apple Design Award for 2017. So I know what works. I know what converts. And those things are quote-unquote transcend what UI layer you use. What do you think?
Sounds good.
So I'm working with a startup right now, basically vetting these ideas out. I've got some sample apps that I'm building out, sharing those with Lori to see what she can do with those also. But my first general goal would be, if you have a responsive website, I want you to be able to install RubyMotion, run one command, and have something that deploys to the App Store, that has all the facilities in place to position you in such a way where you can capture who's using your app, you can capture the engagement, and you can act based on what you've done.
Yes. Okay, now I'll bring your salad. Oh no, I can. No. That's fine.
Yep. So that's my immediate goal, is to get that working for companies.
I'm going to be eating something here in a second, so I'm going to.
What are you doing?
Put my mic off and my video maybe.
Hey, what are you having for dinner?
Some sort of taco salad, I think.
The best taco salad in the world, right?
It is.
My
wife will be here in a minute. It's 6. It's what is it? 6, almost 7 here.
It's your chance for brownie points. If you need to, say publicly, like, I have the best wife in the world.
Yeah.
You make the most amazing taco salad. This is the time to do it. This is your chance.
She's in the other kitchen. She's in the kitchen. I'm gonna mute myself and I'm gonna be listening now. Okay.
But generally speaking, does that sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm gonna do a news release, or whatever, quote unquote press release after all this settles down, and get the general future of RubyMotion. So basically, you want to come to RubyMotion because I'm not some suit that is randomly, head of a company. I'm in the weeds with y'all. I know what works. I know what doesn't. And I'm not just selling you, quote unquote, selling you a cross-platform solution. I'm trying to get you to have a successful app. And that's really, really important. Yay. What do y'all think? Anyone else? What do you think of the whole spiel I gave?
Sounds good. I think too many people try too hard to build stuff without thinking about who's going to be using it first. So yeah, it's a lot easier to build something out on the web and get some validation going before you start embarking on hard things.
Yeah. And like some of the hard things, and some of the quote unquote hard things that I don't want people to worry about are push notification, right? It's not easy. So if that's baked in, that's good. Crash logging. What kind of crash logging will position you in such a way where you can scale with the number of users, right? So you don't want to pay upfront with a lot of for copious amounts of crash logging if you're not really worried about that. So another thing is isolated storage. So you have this wrapped website. There are still things that you want to commit to isolated storage to position yourself in a good, position yourself, quote unquote, correctly to deliver more native experiences, right? So all those like little nuances of, this is how you progress to a successful, full-blown native app is really important. And you might be okay with something kind of in the middle, right? You may not have to go full-blown native for some of those things. And to capture that and to provide a good narrative and good story for how do you guide someone from being just a newbie iPhone developer to having a full native experience is not something that any company can capture or has captured yet. Any other questions?
It'll be pretty interesting to see what you come up with that.
Yeah, and it's basically I've done it 5 times now. I'm working on my sixth app. So I know what works, and unfortunately it's an ever evolving recipe, right? What worked 2 years ago doesn't work anymore. So you got to keep kind of well educated and you have to continue to stay relevant. But yeah, again, it's all subjective. It's really interesting what Apple considers as novel experiences and what innovations exist in this weird subjective engagement business realm of things. So yeah, the more I can codify that into the framework, the better. And I think the first step is really to get your responsive web app out there, positioned in such a way where you can start growing it incrementally, as opposed to hiring, learning Objective-C or getting one of your guys to learn mobile development, the ins and outs, before they can even deploy anything. I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Cool. So you have the sales pitch. So anyone tells you, it's like, man, how do you compete? It's like, this is how we compete. Cool. Any other questions? All right, so RubyMotion internals. I just want to, I guess, talk about how RubyMotion works, right? Do y'all have a good understanding of that? Is that something that's interesting to y'all? Questions, concerns? Yes, no, maybe?
I think I have a pretty good understanding of the basics, but I mean, I never really delved into it, so it's interesting to hear from your perspective.
No, I mean, I would love to, like, I guess, hear what, so I mean, there's obviously like the FAQs and some of the things that are out there with regards to what RubyMotion is, quote unquote, supposed to be. So would you mind giving me your version, not to put you on the spot if you.
Oh, well, I was just talking about how the code gets compiled.
Okay.
And like the lower level aspects of it.
So what do you got?
I don't know, I haven't really thought about summarizing it before.
Bridge support.
Yay, bridge support. Okay, so so basically, RubyMotion. So I guess quote unquote newbie question is, what's the difference between Ruby and RubyMotion? So RubyMotion is basically a static compiler for Ruby. And what it is it's an LLVM front end. So LLVM stands for low-level virtual machine. And if you really want to dig into like the machinery of LLVM, and what you want to do is I would go to llvm.org, docs tutorial. Okay, so there's this toy language. I'll put it in the chat link here. Okay. So there's this toy language called Kaleidoscope, and this quote unquote Kaleidoscope language, what it does is basically lets you create a language that accepts functions, branching, and integers as or like doubles as values, and this basically gives you the high-level aspects of what RubyMotion does. So in essence, RubyMotion is an LLVM front end. Okay? So the interesting thing about low-level virtual machine, or LLVM, is that RubyMotion gets converted to an intermediate representation that can then be used by any LLVM, theoretically any LLVM backend. So the LLVM backends that exist, one of them happens to be for ARM64, which is exactly what runs on iOS devices. Okay, so RubyMotion is an LLVM front end. It takes Ruby code, it parses it, it emits an intermediate representation that then gets compiled by an LLVM backend to something that can run on the device.
Okay.
What's
So how does that fit in with the Apple frameworks? Like how does that all fit together?
So it's because Objective-C also compiles down to LLVM, right? So with Objective-C, basically we're leveraging the Objective-C runtime for interrupting. So when you instantiate, and it turns out that Objective-C and Ruby are highly compatible languages. So when you instantiate something in Ruby, it gets statically compiled to a backing to a backing class that is supported by Objective-C and the iOS framework. Now, how those things come together is the bridge support. So if you look under a / library RubyMotion data, sorry. Let me get the exact path for you. Yep, so / library / RubyMotion / data. Okay? In there, you have iOS, OS X, tvOS, watchOS, and Android. All right? Those are basically bridge supports to use those specific frameworks. So that gives you your, in essence, your foreign function interface to these frameworks out there. And they're just XML files. And bridge support was something that was released by Apple to allow developers to do this thing. You'll see that? So now the next question is that how are these bridge support files generated? Everyone following so far? Okay?
Yep.
All right. So like an example is if I go to, so there was an actual like nuance with iOS 11 where UI notification events weren't being captured in bridge support. So basically, I say, well, is that class supported in RubyMotion? You just cd into your iOS directory, you pick the SDK that you want to look at, and then you can do a grep for that class. And you'll see basically all the signature information for a specific class, functions, enums, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So how are these bridge support files generated? All right, what you want to do is if you go to applications, and you bring up Xcode and you right-click and do what was it called? Show package contents. I can share my screen if that helps. Would that help y'all?
Sure.
Let me share my screen.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
You got it. You got it. Okay. Are y'all seeing my screen? Is that too small? That's probably too small.
It's all right for me. It's a little small, I think.
Yeah. Let me make it.
Let me go full screen. There.
Okay. How about that? Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's the fun, spectacular part of RubyMotion. And when I say fun and spectacular, I mean really freaking annoying. So under contents, developer, platforms, here are basically all of your SDKs right here. Developer, platforms, here's all your SDKs. Okay? So in order to build a full quote unquote full version of RubyMotion, we can look at the iPhone OS.platform directory. And when you go to library, just kidding, when you go to developer SDKs, RubyMotion basically needs to have every SDK ever built by Apple within these SDK directories. And what these SDK directories are, if you look at them, developer, so yeah, SDK, you've got basically all your header files in here. You've got all your libraries and frameworks inside of each one of these SDK files. Let me see if I can find library frameworks. All right, so see, this is your testing kit, your UI kit's in there. Let's go to the latest one, library system, library frameworks. There you go. So you see all those? So basically, each version of Xcode ships with the SDK that it's updated. And you have your public headers that give you access to compile against this stuff. So what bridge support does is basically introspects all these header files and generates the bridge for interop with Ruby and the Ruby runtime. It's what allows you to invoke Objective-C classes or these framework classes from RubyMotion. Questions, concerns, thoughts? So like historically to get all the SDKs, you pretty much have to download old versions of Xcode, extract the SDK file, and store it somewhere, and have it readily available for you. And this is one of the reasons why I'm working towards having a Mac Stadium instance to hold the CI, because it will basically have all the SDKs over there and remove the rigmarole involved with downloading every version of Xcode, extracting it, pulling the SDKs out, and putting it in such a way that you can actually, quote unquote, build RubyMotion. So when you get the RubyMotion binary, those data files are already extracted for you, so you don't have to worry about this stuff. And then the simulator, devices, all those things actually house the implementations of those SDKs.
Where do the bridge support files live?
They're in the data folder. Those are literally so right here inside of library RubyMotion data iOS. These are the bridge support files. So CD bridge support. There they are.
So it reads the bridge support files in the RubyMotion runtime.
Mm-hmm.
And they're basically headers, right?
Yep.
Or metadata of those headers.
Yeah, and we can I can do we can look at one of these.
And then how does the runtime? It's Ruby, or it's written, I guess. How does it create the classes then?
It creates things within its object. So that's why we have a dependency on Objective-C, on the Objective-C runtime. So when you construct a Ruby object, it constructs an NS object behind the scenes. Right, so here's the bridge support file.
Yeah, when I first looked at the bridge support files, one of the things I noticed was there was no information about superclasses or any of that stuff. It was just functions, and they had some class names and some methods inside, but they never mentioned the what superclass. So how does that relationship?
Well, that's the indication of the Objective-C runtime, right?
Okay.
So yeah, if you Google, let's say Objective-C runtime, get parent class, what happens is basically when you call super, it explicitly.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
So really, I won't say almost by accident, but it's just really amazing how close, how much parity there exists between Ruby and Objective C. It's really cool, and that's what makes a lot of this so straightforward and simple. Is it's almost a one-to-one mapping. Like even if you convert Objective C to Ruby, you get almost a one-to-one mapping to everything. And like redefining stuff, like redefining a method is basically method swizzling. Obviously, there's things in the runtime to handle like class define and some of those other variants. That's a lot of the virtual machine magic that happens inside of RubyMotion. But with regards to interop with Objective C, it just quote unquote works. Okay, so to summarize, so the idea here is understanding the internals of RubyMotion. I mean, I obviously want to make things more open, and moving forward, that's where I want RubyMotion to be. I want to make it more open. I want to see how RubyMotion can converge with mRuby, and I want to see what interesting things can happen given that RubyMotion could potentially be an LLVM front end for any LLVM backend. And there's a lot of work there, obviously, but that would be interesting. An example of it, quote unquote, being interesting would be PlayStation 4 games are written, provide an LLVM backend. So in essence, if you have a language that can compile to LLVM bitcode, then you could potentially deploy your stuff to a PlayStation 4. Okay, so it opens up these really interesting scenarios. WebAssembly is another thing that has an LLVM backend. So if you have a language that compiles down to LLVM intermediate representation, that could potentially be used as a WebAssembly, right?
So what about Android? How does that one? We use the NDK in Android. Is that something? But Android could be LLVM, right?
Android is NDK, and Android does have some LLVM capabilities, but the foreign function interface and like the lifetime management and whatnot is bound to Java, right? It's bound to the JVM and whatever could be, not Java, but the what's it called? Runtime Art.
Art.
Yeah, Art. Art, Dalvik, and NDK. So there are some limitations. So those things are unfortunately not as compatible, but it works. And from the perspective of saying it works, it means that I have a game, a Darkroom, which is on Android, which shares code with the iOS version. Like the engine is exactly the same, and it's got 300,000 downloads, right? So it's being used across many, many devices. The next step, though, is to get to a point where your foreign function interfaces and your interop with a more common layer between iOS and Android, quote unquote, just works, right? And that's kind of where Android is.
Mm-hmm.
So real quick, let me show you one other thing. I don't know if y'all have been, sorry, wrong screen. Wrong screen, how do I go? Okay, so just to go through some of these RubyMotion internal stuff. So if you go to mirajon.net /GitHub, github.com/RubyMotion applied. These are basically the things that I want to make sure have copious amounts of documentation, so people can begin to understand Fantastic. Let's try sharing again. Okay. Yes. So I want to make sure that this stuff has copious amounts of documentation so people understand what's involved with how RubyMotion does things behind the scenes. So what is bridge support? How do you generate bridge support files? Exporting all the RubyMotion header files, codifying those, playing around with them, seeing how far we can push form function interfaces into RubyMotion. Hopper is a disassembler, so understanding how we leverage Hopper to reverse engineer specific runtimes, specific frameworks, specific IDEs, and then a general crash course around LLVM that basically that puts you in a position to say, if I wanted to make a hello world program, or if I wanted to make a programming language that did an NS log on an iOS device, what does that take? So that's kind of what this LLVM crash course is. And the idea behind this, again, is to put Motioneers, and I would say by extension the RubyMotion community as a whole, past just web apps and move into environments that are not web. And the challenge is, again, even for the Ruby maintainers, is that they're in a position where it's like very few people, a handful of people really understand the Ruby runtime, the lifecycle management libraries that Bruce has become intimately familiar with at this point, right? It's just a lot of people don't realize the underpinnings, and I think as Rubyists, long-term Rubyists, that's something that's important to be able to reason about, right?
I was using Hopper to try and figure out some stuff, but I'm not an assembly guy, and I started playing with it a bit to try and figure out some of the missing headers and see if I could come up with one.
Yeah, and that's
I also looked at MacRuby for some.
Yep.
And was able to, actually there's some in there that I thought, okay, this should work, and no, didn't work. There was an allocate function in there, didn't work.
Yeah, and those are the things that I want to help push forward. And once we have a handle on that, then it's about, okay, how does MRuby do it? Where's the parity? Where are we losing parity? Where do these things converge? And it's going to be.
Oh no.
Rails is great, but that next Ruby resurgence or whatever has to happen somewhere else. It's not going to be web, because that's already happened. And RubyMotion for me is that quote unquote light, right? There's one aspect of that light there. MRuby is another aspect. We'll see what happens there. But from the ethos of Ruby of being able to write quote unquote elegant code that just works and is highly productive, that can be captured in mobile, I feel. And I just don't feel that the things out there right now capture the productivity gains that you get from mobile, in addition to having a successful mobile app. They just fall short.
I know I've heard people talk about Xamarin, and I suppose if you're coming from a C# environment, Xamarin looks very appealing.
Yeah, and that's fine.
And that's great.
Yeah, I mean, like really.
I don't come from a C# environment, and so it doesn't.
Hey, I come from a C# environment.
And that's fine. C# is a wonderful language.
And I worked with Xamarin quite a bit. The problem with Xamarin, actually, before the Microsoft acquisition, was that it was extremely buggy, and you couldn't count on your apps to work from release to release. I mean, even with releases within the Xamarin world. And it's one of the criticisms that they had. Now, Microsoft, of course, bought it, and I haven't really played with it as much as I used to. and I'm not sure if it's gotten better, but it is a layer. It is the .NET.
Yeah.
There, and it does
.NET-ish. From my understanding, I'm not. Bruce, you would probably know far more than I would. So.
Yeah, I mean, C# is a great language. I mean, there's no doubt it's a good language.
It is. It really is.
So, but you can get lost in the Xamarin world too. I like the smaller company. That's one of the reasons I started looking at guys, because I said, it's a small place. It's like you don't get lost with everybody else in there, and it's a lot of marketing. And the other thing that they do there is they do a lot of bait and switch, and so they'll say, well, here's a new product. This is going to be great, and then they tell you, oh, but this will only be available in the enterprise version of Visual Studio, which they want $6,000 for. So, but they'll put those little pieces out there, like a really nice profiler or something, and they'll say, well, you can't really have that unless you have this version now. But they'll get you to beta test it for them. They like that. And then when they release it, they say, whoa, by the way, it only works here. Yeah. So that sort of thing put me off a bit.
And I mean, you can. I think you can even write iOS apps in BASIC. Like, it's ridiculous that you can write an iOS app.
Yeah, I think the real BASIC did something.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You can use real BASIC. I mean, so your 2 point is like you can write an iOS app in Lisp. Real BASIC. Ruby, Kotlin. Just it's madness. And that's great, right? So then it comes down to, okay, so what else do you provide? Right? What else does the ecosystem, the platform provide to you? And I mean, I think it just really comes down to what makes Ruby different is how Ruby quote unquote feels, right? And have you seen Clobe.rb? Let me show you Clobe real quick. And this so this will be maybe 5 minutes, and this is probably a good place to stop. Does that sound good for everyone? I'll take that as a yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. So I was a .NET. I was originally a .NET developer also. I built my entire early career in .NET. Okay, so this was presented on Ruby Kaigi 2010. Okay, and let me do. Okay, have y'all seen this?
Yes.
No.
Yes, I have.
Who has not seen this?
I haven't seen it until just now.
All right. Bruce, I'm assuming you haven't seen this. You're shaking your head with taco in your mouth, right? So here's the interesting thing. All right, I'm going to, this is a valid Ruby program. Okay, so if I do, I'm going to run globe.rb, and I'm going to send it, and I'm going to save the output into foobar.rb. Okay? And now I'm going to show you what foobar.rb looks like. Right? So this Ruby program, when run, generates this Ruby program. And this is also a valid Ruby program. Okay? So then, so technically, if I run the Ruby program, put the output out, wait a second, run the Ruby program, put the output out, wait a second, you get this. And the crazy thing about this Ruby program is if you pass in So here, here's ruby.globe. If you pass in a value, it turns the globe by those degrees. It generates a Ruby program that turns the globe by those degrees. Like, what kind of madman had to create this thing, right? His name is Yusuke. So he created back in 2010.
This is way better than Pearl Haiku.
Yeah, right? It's freaking insane. So being a .NET dev, like that's what drew me to Ruby. And you can do this in, I mean, I've seen it being done in JavaScript. Like you can do it in JavaScript. But the idea there is that a developer, his creative quote unquote juices brought him to Ruby, and then he built it in Ruby and not JavaScript, or not some other language. And to capture what I think is really unique about the Ruby community is capturing that type of innovation, where it feels so useless, but at the same time it's really profound. And what you just saw, it's like it's a program that generates a program, but it's a program that generates a world, and there's the amount of meta that's required to even comprehend something like that. And I think Ruby still has that. And that's what I want to try to capture moving forward. And it isn't enterprise XML drag and drop FUBAR, right? That's not the end goal. All right, that was my final spiel.
That's pretty amazing.
Right? And like I said, I mean, I've seen actually one done in JavaScript, and it doesn't look as pretty, of course, but the point is that he's a quote unquote copycat, right? The original creator invented this thing, and it's really beautiful, right? It's the most beautiful piece of code I've ever seen. I would say it's right there.
But where's the test? They're probably on Mars.
Hey, it rotates one. That's good. I'm good with that. Okay. So, anyways, RubyMotion applied. Like one of those next steps is to surface some of these internals up, have people understand them, have people realize that Ruby is more than just a Railsy language. You have to being a Rubyist means understanding the underpinnings, right? Means understanding how it works underneath the scenes and contribute to the greater Ruby community in that way.
I'm looking forward to it.
Are you all excited? I'm excited. I'm excited to make AR video games where a scary like ring girl crawls across the top of your ceiling while looking at your phone.
Just not the wall, because ARKit doesn't do walls.
I'll figure it out.
Okay.
No, there's some interesting things interesting experiences that I can think of, right? With regards to especially when they start opening up the infrared camera and the dot projector camera, when those APIs start getting opened up to developers, that will be incredibly interesting too, right? So yeah, I mean, I believe Ruby developers are going to find the innovations in there, and not commoditized cogs and wheels. Use our language so you can build cross-platform applications, right? I don't think those kind of workplaces evoke that kind of innovation.
No, but they can help pay the bills.
No. And the thing is that when you know RubyMotion, mobile, right? You're gonna learn the mobile APIs. That is unavoidable. And one of the things with RubyMotion Applied is to, bring that more to fruition, saying that, yeah, you are part of the mobile community. You're part of RubyMotion, but you're part of the greater mobile community. And we can't be a walled garden.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous to be a walled garden. We got to learn from our mistakes in the past, right? So.
One of the things for me, Amir, is we were speaking a little bit about flow, and Bruce had noticed that there is some issues with the flow UI portions right now.
Yep.
You said that once things settle down with the latest release and stuff like that, is that sitting it high on your priority list, or?
Yeah. So what's sitting high on my priority list is there are UI elements there's a subset of UI elements that are used by successful apps, right? It is not the entire set of all that you can do out there. So for me, flow is a component, but the idea there is that I want to codify those UI elements and say, if you use these UI elements, you will have a better chance of getting featured by Apple. You'll have a better chance of getting featured by Google. You'll have a better user experience overall. And then underneath the seams, I expect you to use Flow or some cross-platform rendering engine that may be a subset of Flow, right? Flow is incredibly complex. There's a lot of complex math out there. The great news is that it's expressive and you can do so many things with it, but mobile just doesn't need that much. It really doesn't. Like if you look at the really great apps out there, they're pretty cut and dry with regards to the subset of UI layouts they use. So my primary goal is to codify those successful layouts and say, use these, evolve with these, and we'll grow that initial recipe. Does that answer your question?
I think so, because I'm also interested, because I didn't look very much at yoga. There was a couple of things that came up. I know the last time, I think 2 months ago when I was on the call, because I missed last month, you had pointed at an Objective-C CocoaPod that you had suggested, like, as a replacement for, instead of using Motion Kit and stuff like that.
Yeah, masonry.
Yeah, masonry, and I had looked at that, and I had noticed that there's been, on some other areas, some guys were talking about this thing called layout, which uses an XML expression, which is not actually bad XML.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
I've done a lot with XML, so I've seen some bad XML.
Yeah, I mean, HTML is XML, so I mean.
Well, yeah, I know, but I mean, I've written XSLTs that parse XMI, so I mean that's how gearheady my XML gets, and XMI is ugly. XMI is the stuff that your RAD tool spits out that's supposed to be interoperable and isn't.
Yeah.
Layout looks good.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, it's Swift based. It's a Swift CocoaPod, which, and we spoke about that, about the where that sits and so forth. And I suppose part of the question can be, is it worthwhile to say, well, could you build an Objective-C version of this, which would then be useful by anybody, right?
Yeah, and the Objective-C bridge is if you have a Swift, quote-unquote Swift-only library, the Objective-C bridge is relatively trivial to build, but that's one of those things that goes back to having that being part of that greater mobile community.
Yeah.
Another thing, Bruce, with regards to yoga, something I want to really explore too, is can we get away with a really maybe something as simple as like the Twitter Bootstrap grid layout? For mobile layouts, do we need something as complex as yoga? And those are the kind of things that I need, basically. So an example, Feedly. If you look at Feedly and Things 3, Feedly, Things 3, and App Figures, those are fantastic UIs. And to build those UIs, it's not a large subset of controls. Okay.
So, like when you look at, and like I said, I haven't looked deeply into yoga, which is a thing. If you look at the layout, one of the advantages that layout does have is because the layout is defined in the XML, It's hot loadable.
Okay.
So you don't actually have to recompile to reload your UI.
Right.
Which can speed up your cycle, which is an advantage. Now, of course, that means they're parsing and tearing apart the XML at some, so that they can do these hot loads.
Right.
But there's an advantage to that sort of an approach to it.
Yeah.
Now, all of these, these guys all come up with, within their companies, they go, oh, this is the thing that we need to do because of how we're working, and they build it, and it's really cool. The question is how sustainable it is.
Yeah,
right?
and it isn't. It frankly isn't. Really what that comes down to is that inside of the RubyMotion REPL, you have something called the top level class.
Yeah.
And basically what you want to create sustainable workflows, you want to use PTY, the REPL, and use automation at that level to explore and look at that. So an example is like you want hot loading, but the state that you need to get your app in takes a number of steps. Well, you need to have a sustainable REPL environment that lets you get to that state.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I wish I could say that. I mean, hot loading is nice and sexy, but it does not scale. It really doesn't. And we can go into some deeper examples, I guess, during our next meetup, and kind of explore that space and kind of how I build out apps. Shameless plug, I'm starting to do more Twitch lately too. So on Sundays, I try to have a Twitch session so you can see kind of how I build iOS applications. And the second Twitch recording that I did explored that REPL automation. So I'd encourage you to watch that, and you can kind of see how I've done quote unquote live reload with REPL. And I think they'll do a better job of explaining that. So I put in the Slack channel, but I'll go ahead and post that link here too, just so y'all have it. I also reminisce about 1990s music. All right, so that's the second video that really explores live reload, REPL, sustainability, et cetera, et cetera.
Just so you know, the reason I was looking at yoga the real reason deep down was I had seen what whoever wrote Flow had already taken something before yoga actually came out. It took pieces of what Facebook had done.
Yep.
What I was thinking about is it's one less thing to worry about. It's like it's an open source project. Bugs will be fixed in it. You could just use it, and then that's one less thing you have to be concerned. Like I said. Whereas when you do your own, you roll your own, now you've got your own bugs to fix, you got all this other stuff you got to fix.
Exactly.
It was just, it's about leveraging. That's all, leveraging, that's all it was really about.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think one of those, I think with regards to Flow and UI, I think yoga is going to end up, being that final goal. The question is, how long does it take to get there? And is there an intermediary that's viable? And I don't know the answer to that yet.
Right. What about Red Potion? What happened to that? I mean, why isn't that one being leveraged? Maybe.
So Red Potion, ProMotion, all that's great. My apps still use that stuff. Really, what it comes down to is that when it comes to UIs, it's opinionated in your UIs. If you like how they do it, go for it. My biggest concern is that I don't think having a quote-unquote monolith is a good idea. I'm not saying Red Potion is a monolith. I'm just saying that you want toolkits and carve out those important pieces and then scope those together, specifically because the quote-unquote most successful open source libraries out there are not written in RubyMotion. Right? They're written in Objective-C or Java or Portable C or some very. So from that perspective, I want to be more defensive about going whole hog into something that may not be sustainable long term, or just doesn't have the amount of eyes to it. But all that being said, yeah, I use ProMotion on ProMotion, Red Potion on all the games that I've built so far, all the UI kit based games that I've built.
Right. I think Lori's course, if I remember correctly, used Red Potion.
Yep. I go through the basics of Red Potion
Right.
in my Winx School course.
So, yeah, it's still being used, obviously. A lot. I think a lot of people like it for the fact that it's
all in one.
yeah, it's kind of Ruby-esque. Is that, I don't even know what the right word is. Ruby.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's your all-in-one solution, batteries included, and I totally get that, and that's exactly why I used it. Right.
Red Potion was intended to be the Rails for iOS development, right? And if a lot of the Rubyists that came to the RubyMotion community came from that Rails side. They had built Rails web apps,
right?
And the idea is that now you could build something, you know, using some of those paradigms, and it's a little bit different. Mobile is different than the web, right?
Mobile is different than the web, and the way you approach mobile development, at least this day and age, I don't think is both feet in. You gotta just, you know, kind of do a little bit at a time and evolve that way, as opposed to 15 minutes you have a native mobile app. It's just I don't think that's really how the business has evolved. At least the mobile UI and mobile business evolved, and I think the core mobile controls are nice, but the really great apps out there don't use the UI table view, right? They don't use those core native controls. They fleshed out their own experiences from that standpoint. So the benefits you get gives you a really vanilla mobile app, and if that's what you want, great. But I want to give you successful mobile apps.
Okay.
So Bruce, the other thing is Andrew, who's very active and was kind of created the Hangout, and so forth, and everything, has taken over maintenance of it. It was done by a group called Infinite Red. Oh, hello, Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. They seem to have migrated to something else.
Yeah, they're doing React Native.
Yeah, they're all React. Yeah, now.
I love React, by the way. Like, I have nothing against React. I think it's a fantastic view engine. It's really, really nice. It's just, you know, it's not going to make you money, right? It's not going to get you the engagement and all that stuff. But another thing that I was thinking about with regards to view layers was with the enhancements of the GPU, especially with Xcode 10 and all those interesting things that are happening there. What stops someone from creating a quote-unquote cross-platform UI layer that's not built with UIKit or widgets, and is built using a game engine, quote-unquote game engine? And I use the game engine loosely because it's basically just a abstraction over SVG into a node hierarchy, right? SVG converted to textures, which is then converted to a node hierarchy, which then can have different declarative animations applied to it and other things. So what does that look like, right? What is a world where a UI ends up being not served up by Battleship Gray controls on the device, but something that has that kind of innovation, right?
I've actually, you know, trying out some toy projects. It seemed like going that direction was the easiest way, the lowest barrier to getting something cross-platform. So, like, even if you're not making a game, you know, just
no, I agree. And the thing is that based on how like those frameworks evolve, and based on the chip architectures, those end up being GPU accelerated, right? So you get some of those interesting benefits, and then you think about just like being able to apply physics to a button. It doesn't sound, you know, like a whole lot, but suddenly it's novel, but that's what makes things interesting, right? Is that your experiences are novel. and that potentially could bring you users. So no, it's not out of the question. And one of the things that I like about React is their idea of request animation frame. The biggest problem, though, with regards to the difference between a mobile device, well, it's just a virtual DOM is a virtual DOM, and it will be interesting to see how that evolves to a virtual DOM for mobile apps. And it's interesting. There are different things to explore. You know, it's something that I want to do is explore those different approaches. All right,
so I was just going to say, one of the things that I knew what I wanted to do with my app is not make it your standard Battleship Gray app. And so I spent yet another ridiculous amount of time learning how to customize everything. In the end, I only gave up on one thing, and that was the map annotations. I just went with the standard ones because it just seemed ridiculously hard to customize them. I have since figured out how to do it. I think I could do it now more easily and show people how to do it more easily. But you do not have to have a Battleship Gray app, and you shouldn't. You should come up with your own theme and colors and fonts and own that UI.
Yeah. And I agree. Right. So if we can lift the Battleship Gray, that's the most important thing. Obviously cross-platform, but move past Battleship Gray. Alrighty, well, I'm thinking, so I'm going to get a quote-unquote beta build out. I want to do a full regression, get the CI server to do a full regression suite on all this stuff. But I'm going to get at least a beta build out tonight and uploaded. And I'll post it to the Slack channel too, so you can try, you know, GM build. You can try the iPhone X simulator, all that good stuff. And then by this weekend, we'll have a RubyMotion 5.0 release. And then once High Sierra drops, there'll be a subsequent release to incorporate those bridge support bits. And then the quote-unquote press release on what the future of RubyMotion looks like. And basically, it'll be concentrating on bring your own language. Yeah, do that, but here's the differentiator for RubyMotion. And where we go from here.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love this stuff, man. I wouldn't have acquired the company. I wouldn't have done this if I didn't enjoy, you know, building apps with Ruby. Right? And I still do it. And I'm still crazy enough to continue building apps with Ruby. So it's a good language. Anything else? Alrighty, everyone. I guess I'll see y'all next month, and then keep an eye on the Slack channel if you want to get the beta bits hot off the presses. And then this weekend will be the legitimate quote unquote release of RM 5.0.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye-bye. Thanks for hosting, Invisible Andrew.
Bye, Andrew.